Welcome. My name is Alan Spector. I'm a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Florida State University. And with me today is Dr. James C. Smith, who is Robert O. Lawton Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience Emeritus. And today we're going to have a conversation about Dr. Smith's remarkable career. I was Dr. Smith's 20th PhD student out of 23. And I first met Dr. Smith in 1975 when I was an undergraduate at Penn State University. I took a course with him. He was a visiting professor for the year. Eventually, he talked me into going to graduate school at Florida State, and I studied under his tutelage. And when I defended my dissertation, he took me into the hallway, put his arm around me, and he said, "Alan, you can call me Jim." So ever since then, I've been trying to do that, but he'll always be Dr. Smith to me. So today you'll probably hear me refer to him back and forth. So Jim, it's great that you're here. We're going to have fun. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. So let's get started at the beginning. When you were growing up, where did you grow up, and was there anything in particular in your youth that presaged or predicted your career path in science?
I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and there was absolutely nothing in my past that predicted where I would be. Where I am and where I have been has been so much by chance, just happened to be in a certain place. I took leave of absence from Florida State to teach at Penn State for a year. And I met you and 10 other students in a class that I taught. When they asked me what I wanted to teach, I told them I'd teach anything they offer me if I thought I was competent to do so. And the chairman of the department said, "Well, we have a course called Methods." That's broad. I can do that. And that's what we did. And where I met you and 10 other students. While at Penn State, they have a magnificent library as a land-grant school. And I spent most of that year reading in a certain area that I was interested in pursuing. And I was inspired by this class called Methods, and I taught you guys some methods in behavioral psychology and in electrophysiology. And we did lab things and had a good time.
I remember.
And out of the 11 in that group, 5 came to Florida State University to finish their PhDs. And in subsequent years, my colleagues used to say to me, "Why don't you go off someplace and bring back a bunch of students like you did this last time?" Because they were all very good. Randy Nudo, one of them, is going to be the lecturer in the Smith
lecturer,
lecture series this next year.
Yeah.
Which will be a double thrill for me because I did not direct his work, but I taught him some classes at FSU, and we were good friends, as well as my friendship with Alan. And I had been reading a lot of history of science. And one of the things that I noted by the great men in science is that they all kept a diary. And so I told the students in this class I wanted them to keep a diary, write anything they wanted to write about the experience they were having. And I can say this freely in front of Alan, that his diary was the most interesting of all the 11 students in that class. He told it just like it was. He made comments about me, where I was from, what kind of culture he thought that I grew up in. And I took up his diary, as I did with the other people, to see what they were writing and see if I needed to modify something about the class. Alan's was the most interesting.
I remember that. I also remember, I think you were 47 years old then, and I thought you were really old. You know, it was really funny. I think I even wrote that in the diary, but not that you were really old, but I think I put something in there about your graying sideburns. But let's go back a little further, all right? Before, because that was 1975. Your career ostensibly started in the early 50s. Where did you go to college?
I went to Birmingham Southern College for 2 years. Why? Because it was about 3 blocks from where I lived. I entered their pre-engineering program, which they didn't have at Birmingham Southern, and so was destined to transfer to Auburn after 2 years and get a degree in engineering kind of things. When I graduated from Auburn, a couple of people in the psychology department that I had met at Auburn said to me, "You would be an excellent guidance counselor." What's that?
It's actually true.
And so, on their advice and their advice about the school, 2 of these professors had once been at Florida State. And so they recommended that I apply to Florida State. And I was accepted in the graduate program there in guidance and counseling, and went to graduate school.
But you didn't stay in counseling. How did you make that shift?
The first day I was at Florida State, I was surprised, very surprised, by the chairman saying, "You're assigned to teach." Teach what? Psychology. And the degree I had at Auburn did not prepare me for that. And the other thing that I was totally unprepared for is that they suggested that a new person had joined the faculty there by the name of Winthrop Kellogg. And he left Indiana and came to Florida State because he and the head of the department at Florida State had been classmates years before. And so I took Kellogg's course, and if you ever took an undergraduate course from Kellogg, you were a Kelloggian for the rest of your life. He was a magnificent teacher. He had had incredible experience in all kinds of things. And I just all of a sudden said, I want to be one of those.
But then, yeah, so you were in graduate school for 2 or 3 years, and then you enrolled or enlisted in the Air Force.
That was 1953. World War II had been over for several years, and everybody was expecting World War III because the Russians were coming. That didn't happen, but it's a good thing it didn't happen because the United States was totally unprepared for any further fighting. And the modernized aircraft, missiles and so forth that they had developed were all brand new things, and they turned airplanes off the assembly line and pickled them because they didn't have anybody who could fly them or maintain them. And that's what I faced in the years in the service, was trying to do catch up to see how you could get the human part of a weapons system up to snuff with the hardware. And it was kind of a fruitless thing.
So you finished up, you came back from the Air Force. It was like, what, 2 or 3 more years to finish your PhD?
The program was, I came back in '56, and I finished my PhD in '59. I took a lot of classes. I took classes from people that I should have been taking classes from before I went into the service.
And along the way, when did you meet Liz and you were married, your wife?
Well, I met Liz before I went into the service, and we married halfway through my service time, having courted by mail most of the time. As a matter of fact, daily. We had a burning of all those letters one time sitting out in front of our house.
A burning?
A burning. Had one of these incinerators, and we just threw letter after letter in there. Said, "It's no sense in anybody else ever reading these things." And so we agreed to do that.
And so then, after you got your degree, you went off to Colgate for a year to be a visiting assistant professor?
I had a distinct feeling that I should not stay at the place that I got my PhD. I was told that by numerous people that this wasn't a good idea. When I finished my degree, I had a lot of experience teaching by that time. And if I do say so, Kellogg loved me, and he didn't want me to go anywhere else. And so he did not lift one finger to try to find me a position anyplace else. A temporary position for 1 year came open at Colgate University in Hamilton, New York. I had the experience of knowing a professor at Syracuse, Matthew Weiner, and he would invite me up for a colloquia at Syracuse, 45-mile drive, sometimes, actually once, in 45 below zero weather. But I went this one night because there was a professor that Matt had taken some classes from at Tufts University. And I have never been so spellbound as I was with this professor whose name was Kenneth Roeder. Ken was educated in England, and his professor thought he was not worthy of a PhD. So he said, "I'll find you a job in the colonies," which is a pretty way of saying something that's inferior enough so you can do all right there. He went to Canada for 1 year and taught, and as Ken told it, he read in Science magazine an advertisement for a physiology professor at Tufts. And he kind of said, I'm a physiologist. I said, I think I'll apply for that. He got the job, and he stayed there his whole life. He made it into the National Academy of Sciences, and
Without a PhD?
Without a PhD. And he got many honorary doctoral degrees en route of that. But he preferred to be called professor, which is what he claimed to be. And I was enamored with rotor, and so when I got back from Penn State, or from this service, one of the first things I did was to invite Rotor down for a colloquium at Florida State in our psychobiology program there. And he was such a hit with his lecture that my colleagues, you knew those guys, who would not ever have the same person come 2 years in a row, but Rotor came probably about 10 or 12 years in a row.
Wow.
And he brought his wife, we got to know her, and he taught me a jillion other things, little experiments and things that were just as clever as they could be.
Yeah.
And I feel like that I really had almost a full PhD postdoctoral experience with Rotor. I had another experience that I combined with Rotor's experience, and that is that I was invited to go for a summer fellowship at the Navy Radiation Laboratory in San Francisco.
That was in the early 60s?
And no, that was, yeah, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
When I went to that laboratory, which was run by a man named Don Kimmeldorf, here was another man that made a huge dent in my life, because if I wanted to do work with ionizing radiation, I needed to learn something about ionizing radiation. And this was the United States Navy's laboratory that did absolutely nothing but study the effects of X-rays and gamma rays. And when I first went to Kimmeldorf's laboratory, he was showing me around, and he took me to a deep therapy X-ray machine that they had a shutter built for at a considerable cost that made no sound, so they could turn the X-ray on and off. And I naturally asked him, how did he know that? And they'd put all kinds of auditory equipment in there and listen to the switch, and it didn't make any sound. And I asked him, what about ultrasound? And he said they had no equipment for measuring that. And I said, do you have an oscilloscope and a amplifier that is free that I could use? And he said, yes. And I said, tomorrow I'll bring you the world's finest ultrasound transducer. Because the sound that the bat made and that the moth heard and could evade the bat and so forth on that was ultrasonic. And so it was quite, and rats are ultrasonic too. They where your cutoff is about 20K, theirs is maybe 30K or something like that. So it was possible that his shutter made ultrasound. And I caught a moth that evening and went to the lab the next day, made a tympanic nerve preparation, and ran his shutter, and sure enough, it made ultrasound. Ruined 5 years of research on his part, thinking that he was awakening a sleeping rat by turning on the radiation machine, and all that time he was stimulating him with ultrasound. I thought Keldorf was going to throw me out of his lab and send me back home, but he called me in his office the next day, and all the work that we had planned to do in his laboratory went down the tube that day. And what's his name? The Birdman.
Audubon?
Audubon.
Yeah.
Who wrote the book on that, had a very elaborate experiment that he did. And he did those experiments in 1832.
Well, what they couldn't smell is what he said, right?
They couldn't smell. And when he did those experiments, from 1832 on to the 1950s, no bird had ever smelled, because no one would defy Audubon. He was the authority on birds. And I have theories of how he had done some careful experiments to show that they couldn't smell were flawed, because of the fact that birds could smell. And one of the things that we took off on, and I had one graduate student who was very interested in this, and he spent all of his time in my laboratory proving that birds had a good sense of smell. And when you ask, how did I dart from species to species and technique to technique, it hit me one day that I had a Vita that looked like Kellogg's. Kellogg did that. He spent time doing behavioral studies. My beloved friend at Florida State, Howard Baker, vision. Not only vision, but what happens in early dark adaptation, and spent his entire life, doing that kind of thing. Which is how I got into the horseshoe crab to begin with, because Hartline was the one who had recorded from the Limulus polyphemus eye, and we all, as graduate students, read Hartline's paper. And when I met Hartline, he had received the Nobel Prize in vision for his work. And so this wasn't trivial. I mean, he was a big gun in that. Wonderful man. I loved him very much. I asked him timidly, can horseshoe crabs see? And he said, I don't know. He had recorded from their eyes for his lifetime, but can you do anything with light to show that a horseshoe crab could see? And so I set off on the idea of conditioning a horseshoe crab so that I could see if he could learn to do something on the basis of light. And he can, but you got to be very patient, because he's the stupidest animal that ever lived.
So Hartline, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't he Lloyd Beidler's academic advisor at Hopkins? Is that right? So talk a bit about Dr. Beidler and how significant he was in your career here at Florida State.
When he came to Florida State, he did not do any more with the horseshoe crab or any vision work at all. His electrophysiology turned totally to taste. And then he had met at Rockefeller, and that's where Beidler picked up his interest in the chemical senses, and so it was an interesting kind of loop that he made, but with Hartline was his professor.
So I want to get back to Beidler and your relationship with him. So obviously I know a bit about it, and it seemed to me that Dr. Beidler was a terrific electrophysiologist, but didn't really know much about behavior, but had a great appreciation for behavior. And I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, but he recognized your particular expertise in that area and how his own research program could benefit. Do you think that's a fair statement?
Yes. He was, of course, he came to Florida State the same year I did. He had a very conservative background in eastern Pennsylvania. And when he came to Florida State, they said that students were scared to death of him.
Yeah.
Because he was apparently very you ought to learn how to do that, I'm not going to teach you. You just go
It was
learn
sink
how
or
to do
swim.
it.
Yeah.
And so his students were very independent kind of people.
Yeah.
And I was a student along with his students. And so I got to be part of his students' life because I could do behavioral methods and so forth, and I was making a contribution to them. And before I knew it, Beidler was appointing me as the outside the department representative on his students' committees. And starting with Inglis Miller way back when, I was the grad student representative for every one of his committees from there on. So then I was engaged in their work to some extent. And
But you were a faculty member then, right?
part-time, I was a graduate student.
Oh, you were?
This was post-service time.
I see, like late 50s. Okay.
I'd come
Wow.
back. I'd
That's
come
something.
back from the service and was more mature and so forth, and tended to be a little less afraid of Beidler. And but it was to me, it was a beautiful thing because obviously he liked me very much. And in the later years, he just did things for me that were just incredible eye-openers. And of course, he knew everybody. I mean, coming from Hopkins, he was there with Hartline, all these guys.
National Academy member.
National Academy member. And by the time our relationship matured, Liz and I were very close to Lloyd and Mary Lou. Very close. He hung around me. I mean, I was hanging around him, but he was hanging around me also. And then Tucker was contemporary with me.
This is Don Tucker.
Don Tucker, as Beidler's student. And Tucker and I became very close. People asked me how I could stand to work with Don Tucker.
Now, before you get to that, so Don Tucker, he was Beidler student or technician or?
Yes.
Both, okay.
Tucker, in his older age,
Older age, yeah.
came to me one day and told me that he wanted me to teach him behavior. And he said that he could no longer do electrophysiology because his eyes were giving out on him. And he was unable to do that. And I told him he was nuts, that I'd done enough work with Tucker to know that I could never do the things that he did with electrophysiology and never do the things he did, cleverness in making olfactory stimulation. You know, beforehand, the early work in olfaction was dip this in the thing and have you sniff it, you know, and so forth. And Tucker was the authority on the methodology and electrophysiology.
So there was Beidler, there was Tucker, there was Pasquale Graziadei, who did olfactory anatomy. Over in psychology, there was yourself, and then you were teaming up with your colleague Mike Rashad, who's now retired, doing behavioral work. So there was a really strong nucleus of chemical senses research at Florida State University, and all that started with you and Beidler in the 60s, maybe even earlier. But I think between FSU and Rockefeller, that was like the chemical senses center of the universe, those two institutions. Do you think that's a fair depiction?
I think it's a wonderful description. And I remember one time, chemical senses meetings sometimes turned into a riot because there were 3 or 4 competitors for who was the guru of the tent. This was in New York City. Zoderman and Hoffman were on the stage arguing about some aspect of olfaction. And we were in this meeting, and Tucker and I were sitting up in a balcony. And the 3 of these gurus were arguing about something, and it was Hoffman who stopped and said, "There's only one person in this world," he said, "that could answer that question fairly, and that is Tucker." He said, "Tucker, where are you?" And I can remember I was sitting there, Tucker was still that graduate student.
Auditorium's filled.
Doing this great work, but off in the corner somewhere. I remember that day, I can remember it very well, that I just wanted to stand up and applaud and say, it's time, it's time.
Well, it's interesting to me because there's such a great history of chemical senses research here that's been going on now for over 60 years, and it's still like that today. There's a lot of the newer faculty here are doing terrific work too. So I want to move on a little bit and talk about Bob Lawton. He was here in the 50s, and you met, and you were very close friends until he passed away in 1980. And then in 12 years after that, you were named the Robert O. Lawton Distinguished Professor, which is the highest honor that Florida State assigns to any faculty member annually. There's only one person a year that gets this honor. So talk about your relationship with Dr. Lawton, and also what the honor of getting that award meant to you.
A person that I put on my list to you who was ultra influential in my life was Joshua Paul Reynolds. And Reynolds was a professor of zoology at Birmingham Southern College, where I had gone. And he was on the board, I think the senior board or whatever at Birmingham Southern College. And also on that board was Dr. John Marvin Aiken, who was a physician and a well-known physician in Birmingham. Dr. Aiken's son, John, and I were in Cub Scouts together. And we remained very close friends forever and ever. And while he was at Southern, he was the guru advisor to people who wanted to go to medical school. And John Aiken Jr. was one of his charges. And can't remember the reason why Paul Reynolds left Birmingham Southern and went to Florida State as an associate dean in the College of Arts and Sciences. And so John Aiken Sr., knowing that I was going there, a naive kind of guy who needed some help and guidance and everything, John Aiken Sr. told Paul Reynolds to take care of me and look out for me. In the College of Arts and Sciences, one night, one evening, there was a knock on the door in our apartment over there, and this guy said, "Hi, I'm Bob Lawton." And I welcomed him and didn't know who he was or where he was from or anything. Was he an insurance salesman or, didn't know. And he came in and we talked, and after a little bit, it was apparent that he knew Paul Reynolds and that he was somewhere in the university system or something, but I didn't know who he was or what he was. And meanwhile, they had expanded that bootstrap program, and Bob Lawton had become the head of that bootstrap program under the tutelage of Paul Reynolds. And so he was paying me a visit, official visit, to see if I was doing a good job and whatnot in teaching these math courses and whatnot. And he came and he visited that afternoon, and Liz was involved in the conversation, and we hadn't made any connections or anything with the university. But Liz said, "Would you stay and have supper with us?" And he said, "I thought you'd never ask." And it turns out that people in the bootstrap program just kind of horned in on each other, and there was always a camaraderie among the people who were doing that. And he stayed and had supper with us. And we talked on into the evening, and Liz said, "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" "Thought you'd never ask." So we housed him up. And
that was the beginning.
And that was the beginning of, long conversations and so forth. So the next morning after he left, I called Paul Reynolds and I said, who is this guy? And Paul said, "He's your boss. Did he not say that to you?" And so he had come to visit me with that. Their son taught at University of Alabama in Huntsville. And Lise went up to stay with Marcy and help her out. And Bob drove up that afternoon, and he was just a few blocks from their house. He didn't know where he was, but he had finally found it where it was when his car was hit by a drunk driver. They had a service for Bob at the Methodist church where he belonged. And things were going along pretty smoothly. And Bernie called me up and said, I got to have a service for Bob on campus. He said, I need closure on this thing. And he said, you're in charge of it. You organize it. And you can't give me what you think we ought to do. And so that's when the honor for Bob Lawton came forth. So you asked me how I felt about it. I mean, with the deep, close personal relationship that we had, I was pleased to have it. And we still, to this day, are in close touch with their daughter, who is a humanities professor at Millsaps College in Mississippi.
As you know, we're going to post this interview, and two of the sites we're going to post a link to it on. One is the ACHEMS, Association for Chemoreception Sciences site, and the other one is SSIB, the Society for the Study of Ingested Behavior. Now, these are two organizations you were like a pioneer in terms of founding. And, you know, I thought for those members and for the general public, for that matter, I'd like to hear your thoughts about what it was like, how in those early years, you know, the formative years of these organizations and your role in that, and what these two scientific societies have meant for you and your students.
Well, they've done something that I'm partially responsible for, I guess, and that is a semi-marriage between the two organizations, because many people who originally joined in with ACHEMS got involved in SSIB. And people like Ralph Norgan, you know, just naturally floated in there. And people like Tony Sclafani came on later on, you know. Nobody knew him in ACHEMS. And so the interplay there was really neat as far as I was concerned. And I kept up with membership in ACHEMS. But kind of dwindled away from them and spent more time with the SSIB group, but I supported both of them, kept my membership up in both of them, and was subsequently honored by ACHEMS by receiving the
Outstanding Achievement Award.
the what?
It's called the Outstanding Achievement Award. Now it's called the Max Moselle Outstanding Achievement Award. Yeah, in honor of Max, one of the founding fathers of ACHEMS. And in SIB, you won the Distinguished Career Award. That was in the, can't remember, 2002, 2003, something like that. So there are a few people who have really had an impact in your career? And I know it's a long list, but maybe you could talk about some of those individuals.
Well, Elliot Speller was, from Hopkins days, companion of Lloyd Beidler and Howard Baker. And he came here, and one year he said he wanted to have a talk with me because he had engaged this fellow, John Garcia, who had apparently irritated Elliot from the very beginning, but he had been very hesitant to publish anything about taste aversion learning because he didn't believe in it. And so
Elliot didn't believe in taste aversion learning.
Didn't believe that it was
a real
really learning and all
Yeah.
the things that people complained about it to begin with. And so I told him that I would give him my facts about it, and he could make his judgment, as to what he thought about it. But Beidler brought him to me and left him for a half a day. And when that was over, Elliot and I were good buddies. I mean, that's all I can say, is that I came that, and when I would have something happen to me that seemed like it had some stem someplace, I'd trace it back, and it was something that Elliot had done for me, So he just, I don't know, just became a senior companion that we just got along very well. And he appointed me to the board of whatever it was of the
Journal of Comparative and Physiological Psychology,
Psychology.
JCPP.
Which was a boost to my career, to be able to be selected to that at a young and early age. And he, of course, introduced me to a lot of people that, and he invited me to his birthday party when he turned 70.
So a few others, like one name that comes to mind is Ross Henderson, who was research faculty here, and he was the biomedical engineer, and he had a big impact on your career.
I knew Ross before I knew Ross, and I can't quite remember how that came to be, but Ross, Susie, and the two kids stayed in our mountain house on their way to accepting the position at Florida State. So it was before they actually got here that I knew him, met him, and we had already talked about some things that I wanted to try to do. And I always desperately wanted to have something that would measure something about taste and smell in the work that we did. And he just designed this stuff for me all along. And we got to be close as families, Jim Gibbs and Jerry Smith. And one time I was invited to come to White Plains. It was when Ross had finished building the hotel. Ross had finished building the Davis rig. And was a third thing that he had done. And so I just wrote Norrie back and told him that I wanted to talk about hotels, motels, and slop houses. What? And because the hotel was the hotel as it became known as, you know.
This was a device
Yeah.
to
And
that these were rat cages,
motel
right?
was short-term kind of thing with the
Yeah.
Davis rig
Right.
that you could do things with, and
Just to be clear, so because not everybody knows hotels and motels for rats, right? These were devices to measure.
I had slides made up.
Yeah, I know, but these are devices to measure food and fluid intake and licking and responsiveness of rats to different foods and different taste stimuli and so forth. Anyhow, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to clarify that. Can I ask you one more question?
Yeah.
All right. So, whole great career in behavioral neuroscience. Of course, they called it all kinds of different things as your career evolved. So what advice would you give grad students, postdocs, junior faculty that would help them succeed at their careers? You know, looking back at your own career, do you have any advice that you would give them?
Well, I would think that the thing that I think that we have done a pretty dang good job is the Thursday of the Smith Lecture Series, where the students aren't just having pizza lunch with the visitor, but are having a day with that. And I would say that the thing that tickles me most about the Smith Lectureship and so forth is the fact that our guests say that the most enjoyable part of the whole week is the day with the students. And that makes me feel good.
So students should engage more with faculty visitors and things like that.
And people like you who have a lot of social activities with, you know, on occasions, but just a general thing, and invite a pig pot bunch of people come to your house, and I've met some very fascinating people there who have been guests and students in our own place that I didn't know as time grew older. So
Wow, that's good advice.
You know, I guess that sort of goes back to the Danforth days for me, you know, where the emphasis was put on that kind of thing. And I think FSU's done a good job of that just generally over the years, starting with not Kellogg. I mean, you know, you didn't go to Kellogg's house.
You didn't. He kept that separation.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the old-fashioned thing, you know, Paul Naif coming in and telling you that when he was in Titcher's lab, they had to wear their caps and gowns.
Yeah, this has been great. And of course, I just want you to know that, you know, you're just one of the most brilliant scientists I've ever had.
This is what?
I want you to know that you're one of the most brilliant scientists that I've ever had the privilege of working with and learning from, and you're the best damn teacher I ever had. just want to say that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You have always been an inspiration to me from the first semester I met you. And so I am pleased to say that my life has been much better to have you in it than it would have been otherwise.
Well, thanks everybody for watching this conversation, and I want to once again thank Dr. Smith for spending the time to talk with us about this.